Welcome back to Question Period. Prime Minister Mark Carney is going to give it another go, heading down to Washington, D.C. on Monday, where he'll meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. The last D.C. meeting was cordial, but ultimately didn't secure an end to American tariffs on Canada. Will the Prime Minister have better luck this time, and what happens if he can't secure any trade relief? Our Sunday strategy session is here to dig into the political stakes. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst, as well as former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Hi. Kathleen, I'll start with you on that very central question. Like, politically, what are the stakes for the Prime Minister heading into this meeting?
I think they're huge. You know, he's walking a tightrope. He has to somehow get some short-term relief. The tariffs are pounding away at workers, at sawmills, all throughout BC and throughout Canada for that matter, and auto and aluminum too. But he has to not give away too much, right? We're about to go into CUSMA or NAFTA 2.0 renegotiations. He can't give away too much sovereignty of Canada on defense, on energy. He can't hurt workers of the future. So the question is, like, what's a win for Carney next week in Washington? And it's puzzling, really, because, you know, he's going down there in a diplomatic effort, but he has to come back with some kind of deliverable. So would I want to be a part of Carney's team right now in writing that communique in advance? I don't think so. But he has to show something that is being done, because he has let so much slip. Not only the deadlines that he set for himself in the past, but he's given away things, right? He's rolled back the counter tariffs. He's removed the digital services tax. He's backtracked, frankly, on the global minimum tax. So we have to see some wins soon. And I'm really concerned, frankly, about what that might mean in terms of overall sovereignty or any damage to the long-term view, which is the CUSMA negotiations.
What do you think about that framing, Kory, that essentially, I take Kathleen's point, like there has to be something tangible that you tell Canadians out of this meeting, I feel like, given what's happened over the last 6 months. At the same time, how careful does he have to be about what we end up ceding in exchange for that?
Yeah, I think there's a very, very low likelihood that there's going to be a deal coming out of this meeting. I think it's extremely low. And any notion that there's going to be a good deal at the end of this for Canada, I think, has been dispelled over the past number of months as we've seen what's happened with other countries, frankly. There isn't a tariff-free option, and I think available to Canada in terms of this negotiation. We're gonna take what the U.S. gives us. I think is sort of the, you know, what we should be looking at, because that's sort of how it's gone for everyone else. I think the big question will be like the CUSMA negotiations. That's not going to be settled. You know, we've essentially have zero tariffs in all but the steel, aluminum, and obviously auto, softwood lumber. So those sector-specific ones are bad, but, you know, we're running with the lowest tariffs of anyone in the world for everything else. I just don't think that's bound to last. I think CUSMA is not going to go as well as it did last time, and I see no path for that being settled at this meeting.
Well, it kind of informs what I would characterize as like a highly risky environment for the Prime Minister and the federal government in this meeting, Scott. Like exactly what what Kory, pardon me, just laid out, right? Like, we know that no one's getting a tariff-free deal. Maybe if they're able to come home and say, hey, we've got, you know, tariffs on steel and aluminum reduced to 15%, that's at least some kind of deliverable. But on the broad strokes of it, like, who knows what the heck Trump is going to do, which feels like a very high-risk environment to head into.
I agree with that strongly. Really, I mean, all the knuckles are white, man. Well, why is this meeting even occurring? You know, and I think a big part of its success, quote unquote success, will have to do with what we hear in advance of the meeting and how the context for it is set. Because, you know, you guys are talking about, well, what can we expect from the meeting? What will the tangible gains be? What will the wins be? I think a lot of people are looking at it and saying, let's just hope we don't come away with further harms. Let's hope that the president, who appears to be particularly volatile these days in the context of the U.S. government shutdown, as he seems to sort of be in a mood of acquiring and exercising power in every domain available within his eyesight, let's just hope that he doesn't seem to turn his negative, nasty gaze on us for this meeting. So why are we there? And so in many respects, I think the most important job is one that will happen prior to this meeting. I think, you know, we need to hear from the Prime Minister and his officials, right, we need a sense of what are the expectations? What is the message? What might we anticipate? Because some people are going to look at this meeting and say, well, it couldn't possibly occur unless there's some sort of breakthrough. Others might look at it and say, my God, does this mean that supply management is being surrendered? Or is it something else altogether and we might see a deal on the Golden Dome and so a defense partnership of some sort? I think some context in advance of the meeting, because expectations could be running rampant and they could be running in multiple directions. So I really think there's a job of setting context that needs to happen prior to it. This government, you get the impression, it almost lives off an abundant confidence in the Prime Minister's obvious capability and competence. But that can't be the whole of your approach. You have to give people a sense of, this is what's happening. This is why this meeting is occurring. This is what you shouldn't fear. This is what you might expect. And if you can exceed those expectations, great. But if you don't set them, you're sure as hell not going to exceed them. And particularly in a context like this, which feels very, very laden with risk, because the president seems exceptionally volatile these days.
But to be blunt, Kathleen, if I look back over the past 3 months, let's say in the lead up to that August the 1st deadline and since, there has been no effort on the part of the federal government to set that context publicly facing. There has been, and I understand the impetus around not negotiating in public, not disclosing all the details of what's been happening behind the scenes. But even this week, the reason we found out that Prime Minister Carney and President Trump had spoken is because a reporter shouted a question on the way into, I think it was caucus, and the Prime Minister said, yes, we've spoken. And then when, how, why, like none of those questions were answered. There was some testimony from Dominic LeBlanc, Minister LeBlanc, this week before a committee that again indicated like a deal wasn't dead. But other than that, like we know nothing about what's happened over the past few months.
Yeah, it could either be what Scott just outlined, which is just a great confidence in the Prime Minister to solve this as the CEO kind of Canada, and they have overwhelming and maybe naive confidence in his ability to settle this deal, or they're just hunkering down, and the PMO is just hunkering down and can't actually or doesn't want to put out kind of what the litmus test for this trip will be. I mean, surely one of the ideal scenarios would be a de-escalation of the 232 tariffs, some kind of pause or rollback, or at least a period in which they could kind of further debate them. Just this past week on September 30th, they slapped another 10% on softwood lumber. I mean, that will have an impact on direct workers, on mills across Canada. And the only thing we can hope for is that actually corporate U.S., the corporate United States, starts to speak about this, because who buys most of our wood from BC and other provinces? It's Home Depot, that's based in Georgia. So hopefully they'll push back and they'll say how this is hurting their bottom line, and that could actually urge, Trump. I'm with Kory that I don't have a lot of faith that will actually happen, but that is one of the venues in terms of applying pressure for Trump to actually take a pause and a beat on these 232 tariffs that are damaging, our economy so greatly and hurting workers particularly.
Is there a way that, publicly facing, Kory, in your mind, they could set some sort of expectations ahead of this trip? Like, if they were asking your advice, would it be to set some?
I would set the expectation that nothing's going to happen. Like, this is going to be a conversation. Because I just don't see how there's an agreement coming out of this that's better than what the status quo is. The end game here is a renegotiation of CUSMA. Right now, as bad as the 232 tariffs are for those affected sectors, it could be a heck of a lot worse. And for most countries in the world, it is a heck of a lot worse. And I don't think we should be, speeding towards a deal that's worse than the status quo, which is, I think, almost inevitable if you're looking at comparables with other countries. So I would be lowering expectations, like with respect to the Home Depots of the world, to Kathleen's point. Last time around, we had companies in the United States who were willing to stand up and push back against administration when it was in their interest to do so. We have seen absolutely no sign of that happening this go around. Yeah. The friends and allies in Congress, in the Senate, governors, across the board, they've been cowed into silence. And I really think we're on our own. It's a much more difficult situation than it was last time. And, not to be too pessimistic, but I think it only gets worse from here.
So then to your first question, Scott, like, what is the point? And we talk about strategy, we talk about politics. Like, what is the point politically of going there on their turf to engage in that kind of conversation that could result in, you know, as little as both Kathleen and Kory just described?
My guess, and to a certain degree, my point is, why should we be guessing? Why? Like, I don't think this conversation is particularly helpful to the government. If I was in the government, I wouldn't be thrilled with it, because we're speculating wildly, even as we seem to think that it's unlikely we'll see some kind of announcement. We're still speculating about that possibility. You know, so why do I think they're going? My guess is the reality of the meeting is that it's come about because Trump has said, look, you know what? We've been talking by text. We've been sending telegrams and, balloonograms to one another. Let's actually just meet face to face. Come on down and let's talk about some stuff. So just like we're making this too complicated when we say, oh, well, what is the litmus test that can be set? What are the standards that might be set that we can just tell us what the meeting is? Like, if the meeting is just, we received an invitation, we want to talk this stuff through, we don't expect any announceables, we don't think any breakthroughs are going to occur, this is a necessary and important conversation, keep things on track, particularly with CUSMA looming, then just say that. That sets, as Kory suggested, expectations, sell or low. And that's probably the right place to be. Because, leaving people to speculate as we are, that maybe there is a deal, or maybe there's a deal, but it's not good enough. That's a zero help to government. That's not where I would be, and that's not what I would tolerate in public. I'd get into the vacuum and fill it fast.
Okay, I'll leave it on that. No three people I'd rather speculate with than the three of you. Thanks, everyone. Our Sunday strategy session, Kathleen Monk, Kory Teneycke, and Scott Reid. Coming up, the federal government has promised the upcoming budget will include major investments, but also significant operational cuts. Are both possible? Former Parliamentary Budget Officer Yves Giroux and former top bureaucrat, clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, will join me together after a short break.